So we move from one end of the age spectrum to the other. Great pleasure to introduce Sashina Ahuja, who's been leading and very instrumental in the BSS Delphi study into best management for adult spinal deformity. So over to you, Sachin.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Sachin Ahuja. I'm a spinal surgeon based in Cardiff, and I'm going to be talking about the adult spinal deformity guidelines that we've been working on. And I would like to thank the organizers for asking me to come and update colleagues about what we are doing and where we are with regards to this. So as you know, we've had this presentation on past few meetings. The group that was set up and was tasked to do this has been led by Bob Crawford, one of the surgeons based in East Anglia, in Norfolk and Norwich, and myself, along with the help of Joost van Middendorp, who's an epidemiologist by background and has got vast experience in spinal research. And in fact, he is giving a plenary talk on spinal cord injury during BritSpine this year. So that's how it all started. And we split this up into multiple substreams, with patient selection being the top category, then diverging into non-operative management and surgical management, preoperative assessment, complications, cost effectiveness, and revision surgery. And these 7 streams put together would be the part of the adult spinal deformity guidelines that we've been tasked by the British Scoliosis Society. So we put together a committee, a group of colleagues who formed the steering committee, and each one was tasked with a specific substream, with Ian Nelson and Irfan Siddiq looking after the patient selection group. The non-operative management was under the auspices of Mike Gibson, Pete Milner, and Ian Nelson. The preoperative assessment was led by Vinay Jasani and Thanos Serikos from Edinburgh. Surgical techniques with Sean Molloy, Nas Qureshi, and Ian Harding. Cost effectiveness with Ashley Cole and Lee Breakwell. Complications are one of the hardest substreams in my view. Bob Crawford, Nazri Ahmed, Saeed Mohammed, and Silvio Sabu, and the revision surgery group headed by Saeed Mohammed, Silvio Sabu, and myself. So this was the steering committee which was put together to look at each of the substream and come up with some guidance. So initially we went through a process of selecting the questions. We did a literature review, and the literature review at the time was up to 2017, with which the draft guidance was written. And this is something that we presented at BritSpine in 2018. And the drafts were put together, which were taking into account the evidence. But as you all know, the evidence is pretty sparse about various aspects of adult deformity surgery. And basically, we felt it would be useful to have committee's views. And one aspect which we worked on was the committee's comments on what the real life scenario is. This is something that we presented in 2018, and that is where the work was. And one would wonder what's happened in the past 2-3 years. I know one good big thing that's happened in the past year, but generally from the guidelines point of view, there has been a little bit of a pause, and we had some barriers. Like any process, you do come across barriers, which can be some challenges which you've got to overcome. And I would just put it under the headings of administrative issues and communication. As we all know, communication is one of the commonest issues where things can break down, and the processes and the workings of the team can be affected. So let's put it in a very gentle manner that was the cause, and how we need to proceed further is what we were thinking of. But In the interim, there have been certain things that have happened since 2019. The spinal surgery GIRF report came out, which was produced by Mike Hutton, which covered adult spinal deformity. And it talked about how high the complication rates are for this type of surgery compared to the other type of surgical procedures that we perform. The complication rates could be about 70% in some quoted papers in the literature. And virtually 30% of these are some sort of major complication. The revision rates for this surgery are high, with nearly 13% or so as quoted in the GIRF report at 1 year, and about 25% at the 3-year mark. And what Mike found in his visits and his evaluation of the HES data is there were 24 units that were performing this procedure, of which only 18 were performing more than 10 of these procedures per year. So, that is in itself says how uncommon this procedure can be in the given scheme of things. And also the cost, that utility of this procedure, because the primary cost for surgery, the only other paper that comes up, which has been quoted in the GIRF report, is the American study, which shows that the primary cost for primary procedure is about 103,000 or US dollars. And with the increased readmission costs and increased procedures that are required, an admission cost of about 67,000 US dollars. So it is not a surgery where it is cheap, it is quite expensive. And that is something that we got to be borne in our mind, we need to keep in our minds. There's another interesting paper which was published in the Journal of Spine Neurosurgery in 2019 by Kaiser and Dominic Rothenfluh from Oxford. And this looks at the HES data. This looks at the HES data for 10 years between 2005 and 2010. And if you can see what is happening between 2005 and 2015, there is an increased number of patients who are having procedures done, and the number of patients has virtually doubled in 10 years. And more than 60, if you look, has virtually trebled. It's gone up threefold, whereas other spinal conditions have gone up, but not as much, maybe about 10 or 20%. Right, so that is quite a stark reminder of the volumes that we are going to face as we project this to 2025 or even further. So the numbers are going up, and we got to be mindful of that. But at the same time, the population hasn't grown that much. There's only 10% increase of over 60s in this period of time, just to put things into context. This next graph shows the volume of surgery, and it shows that the volume of surgery has gone up nearly 3 to 4-fold. And above 60, it's nearly gone up by 6-fold. And if you can project those values and you do some mathematical modeling, you can see by 2025, in the next 4 or 5 years, the numbers are going to go up significantly. And the other thing they found was the episodes of incidence of surgery per 100,000 population is going up as well, right? And the projected figures from that paper suggest that we are potentially looking at about 330 patients per annum, with an additional cost of about 8.1 to about 11.5 million pounds per annum in the next few years. So it is quite expensive surgery, and it is quite a big procedure that patients go through. And also in the meantime, the AO Spine were working on an international consensus on the appropriate evaluation or treatment for adult spinal deformity. And they put together a group, and the way they worked it was more like an evidence-based Delphi. So they relied on 4 stages. The stages were goals for care, the preoperative parameters, the intraoperative considerations, and postoperative considerations. And they went through 4 rounds of the Delphi process. And the first round was taking into account 2 peer-reviewed articles pertinent to adult spinal deformity. And then to the next phase of 4 case scenarios, which was provided to the expert group, and then talk about the operative technique that was actually performed for this procedure, as the third round. And some of the aspects of the second round were revised in the third round. And the final round was the interactive face-to-face discussion, where they came up with the evidence and the consensus statement. Says a consensus being inappropriate, no consensus, or appropriate consensus. And some basic things that they came up with were, if looking at the goals of care, it was agreed that improvement in function, pain, and neural symptoms would be appropriate goals of care. For preoperative assessment, a long film, a whole spine X-ray, MRI, and maybe a DEXA scan would be an appropriate investigation. From a patient evaluation point of view, history and documentation of comorbidities were considered appropriate, and there was consensus on it. Then there wasn't that much of a consensus with the majority of the surgical approaches and the intraoperative options that one might utilize. But there was reasonable, and they agreed that there was reasonable consensus for that. Certain things were considered inappropriate, like decompression alone in patients with significant deformity and long curvatures. And it also felt it was inappropriate to fuse to L5 when patients have got a degenerate and symptomatic L5S1 disc. So certain things had consensus, certain things, as one would expect, there was no consensus and was thought to be reasonable. So where are we now? So we had to press the reboot button, and I would apologize because I'm leading it along with Bob, and we had some hindrances, some barriers, which I've discussed briefly, which we had to refresh. We had to look at how we refresh things, how we restart, and perhaps COVID gave us an opportunity or did not give us an opportunity, as we've been distracted with so many other things. But we thought we need to refresh the team. So we just got in some more young blood to help us out. So we've involved two trainees, John Afolayan and Alexander Durst, who have been helping us out. John's been pivotal in helping us go through the literature review, along with Nazmuddin, who's one of our consultant colleagues who started about a year ago. So we thought we'll just get some fresh faces in who will reinvigorate the process. And in fact, they have. And it's been very helpful to have them on board, have the hunger and desire to produce this. So where are we now then? So as things stand, we had to revise the drafts, because if you can think about it, it's been written by 7 different authors for 7 different substreams. So that needs to be harmonized. And Alexander Durst has taken up that responsibility, apart from updating the most difficult of the substreams, as I mentioned, the complication substream. And he's in the process of harmonizing, and he's achieved most of it. As you can imagine, Just is a very hard taskmaster to actually get him to a level where he's satisfied is pretty hard in my view, but still we are achieving it, and hope Just would concur that we have achieved that. We have done an updated literature review, and we've gone right up to October, November last year. And we've gone through a title screen again, an abstract screen, a full text screen. And John is in the process of updating the data extraction sheet with the updated literature that we have reviewed. And the plan would be that we then move from the updated literature review to the data extraction to the updated drafts. And those drafts would be shared with the steering committee again for their input. And once that has achieved the level and confidence of the steering committee group, then it will go through the Delphi process, which Just is going to administer, which may need 2 or 3 rounds. And eventually we hope to have the draft guidance ready, and hope we can get that bar all the way across to completion. And then once we've got a draft guidance ready, we may actually get input from the membership, from BSS, and perhaps from BAS as well, before we publish the final guidance. So that's where we are, and that's my update as to where we are with regards to the BSS adult spinal deformity guidelines and updates.
Thank you very much, Sachin. So we can open that up for discussion now. So there's a couple of comments there that I think are pertinent. Rajat Verma's making the point perhaps that the rise in incidence of treatment for these conditions is perhaps a recognition of an unmet need that we didn't recognise before. And going along with that, Jason Bernard's just pointing out that perhaps candidates for surgery are more suitable now because they're fitter. You got any comments to make about that, Sachin?
No, I agree. I think we've just come out of a session on the growing spine and early onset, and you can see the views, which are, I wouldn't say polarized, but there are two ends to the story, isn't it? Like where one would say that we perform this surgery, it's very successful, our data is very good. But on the other hand, you've got this dichotomy of very high complication rates. And somewhere in between is the truth. I didn't want to say too much about the magic with what I'm involved with the MHRA, so I'll keep that out. But generally, we can see what the issues are. And I suppose both Rajat and Jason are coming to a very valid point, right? As you can see in Mike's report, the number of cases done in certain centers are not that high, and certain centers are doing plenty of them. And if we look at the commissioning point of view, we talked about it before, is it's high cost, and in some places it's low volume. So perhaps it's time that we as a fraternity think about it and say, right, this surgery is appropriate, these patients are appropriate, they need something doing because that will help them, it'll improve their quality of life. And if you look at the cost-effective stream, which Ashley and Lee have done, and you can see there are papers which show that there is improvement in quality of life. So nobody's saying no. Perhaps we need to change how we work and maybe just, corral it into certain centers which will do high volume with better outcomes. And at the end of the day, the patient gets the best sort of an outcome. And I think that would be the way to go forwards. How it happens, I know there'll be a lot of debate about it. There will be, of course, people might feel a bit, I'm losing this or I'm getting this. I think that is something that we have to take that into account.
So both Ashley Cole and Mike Hutton have picked up on that. And there's this concept then of a critical mass of cases, critical number of cases to maintain competence. Any thoughts about what that critical number might be, or what a suitable centre might be?
I think data will drive that. The data will drive that with the number of cases done in the center. Data will drive your proms from that center, and the patient-reported measures as well. Like what the patient satisfaction is. As you remember, was it 2018 in BritSpine, where one of the patients came and gave a fantastic talk about how life had changed after surgery for adult spinal deformity. So we can't walk away from that fact. We are making a difference with what we are doing. But again, data will drive it, experience will drive it, expertise will drive it. And I think the more data we have from BSR, I think that will put centers in a good position to actually claim that they should be the ones that should be doing this. And I don't think there should be any problems in that.
So I guess the problem we've got is that how long do we wait? Do we wait for BSR to give us the answers, and how long will that take, and what happens in the meantime?
So as we heard yesterday in David Bell and Robert Lee's talk about the BSR uptake has gone up significantly. We are getting about maybe 60% of cases being put on the BSR. I think we as centers have to, I put my hand up, we put cases on BSR, but do I take them through the full journey to have everything on there? Perhaps that's not happening yet. And we have somehow got to work our way through to get that longer term data and information so that we can then derive some reasonable sort of conclusions from that data. And I think that's something that we need to be working on. And I know the BSR committees thought about it a lot, trying to see if it could be centralized, because there could be a central core who could be chasing the data and making sure. There are some good examples of certain centers, and Mike would vouch for it. Mike has said that on occasions. centers like Manchester, which collect a lot of data, and there would be others. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but this is from my conversation from Mike. So I think that is what we need to invest as a group, so that we can get good data.
Yeah, so Fred, it's always the key, isn't it? And then deciding what outcomes we're going to measure.
That's another one. I'm not sure whether our document looks at specific outcomes, but yes, it's something that we could build in as something that we could, because based on that, the cost effectiveness and the complications, there are certain, I think the BSR has its own pathway for adult spinal deformity. Yes, we could tweak that. I don't think that should be a major issue.
So a very good point made by Adrian Gardner from Birmingham, that perhaps making the proms for this part of the best practice tariff. But again, it goes back to, which ones are we going to pick? Length of scar, do we incorporate that, or return to walking, or whatever, return to a particular activity?
See, I think that's what is important. See, whether we are doing this for leg pain, whether we're doing for actual back pain, those are the things that the patient will report as the improvement that they get. Yes, some of them may have a cosmetic element to it as well, where they say that we are tritely twisted, I'm not standing upright. But those are the things that matter to the patient, right? And those are, yes, length of scar also matters, but those were the initial things that the patient present with. And these are the things that patients will come back and say, my leg pain is better, my walking is better. Back pain is always that hot potato where people would say it gets better, it doesn't get better. So that may be a little bit difficult to actually quantify and get a consensus amongst all of us as to what would be appropriate. But I think that would be something reasonable to consider, in my view.
Ashley Cole in Sheffield's pointing out the EQ5D tool is quite good for degen spine deformity, and will give us a measure of quality of life outcomes. So whether we choose that, I've got another question coming up. Good message here coming out from Rajit and Jason Bernard. So yes, I think the question about consent's an important one for this. With such high return to theatre rates and complication rates, what sort of consent packages do we put together for these patients?
I think we've heard about consent over the years quite a lot. And even yesterday, there was a good session on it. The bottom line is we've got to be very open, honest, and candid with our patients. We've got to tell them how things are. Like if I go back to any other procedure in orthopedics for that matter, the one which would stand out is Dupuytren's contracture. Whatever you do, they'll get a contracture again to an extent if they live long enough. And same here. So like we had that debate the year before, in BSS, where it was, and because it was titled, it's a slippery slope. Once you start, something or the other is going to happen. And I think that's what needs to be emphasized to the patients. And there is adequate literature to support that. I think we have to go through all that. And I agree with Jason. We have to be very open. We've got to absolutely tell everything to the patients about what the risks are, because there are plenty. You name it, and I'm sure those of you who've done fair amounts, and you come back and you look at some patients and you go, how did this happen? And it just comes back and stings you with something or the other.
So Adrian Garner's asking, is there scope for a new outcome tool driven from the UK?
Yes and no. At this point, my head is too buried into these guidelines. As you can imagine, there are 7 substreams, and total we've got 70 questions. So in a way, the group is writing 70 meta-analysis. Yes, these are very useful points that we will take back to the steering committee. And if there are things that we could come out with, of course, Adrian, we will take that on board. That is a very, very valid point. But at this point, we are absolutely concentrating on the task at hand. I didn't say one little thing there is when I reconnected with you after, I don't want to go through everything, but whatever happened where I was and used at one point even said, perhaps it's time to can this project. Certain projects won't go ahead. And I said, I'm never going to let that happen. And he then, after a little while, turned and said, your enthusiasm is far more than my patience in a way. So I said, yes, it is, because I'm not going to let this go, because this will be done. And that's why we've got some really good people on board, like Alex and John have been exceptional, and Naz, who's been helping us out. And we hope we can complete this. And I go back to Adrian's point that, yes, we will take all that on board, and hopefully we'll come up with something. And and Adrian, we can connect about this and see how we can work this through. Thank you.
So, quite a lot of questions. There's another one just come in. Interesting question from Jason about psychological screening for depression and somatization. I don't know if you can see that, Sachin.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't read the full thing, but no, yeah. But that's the story of back pain, isn't it? And with everything that we do, so yes, there are that things to be looked into as well. Yeah, but that's something that we all got to keep in mind, and that's true for every patient that we deal with in a way.
Yes, well, I think we knew from way back from the Fritzl's Swedish study that the best outcome for surgery is basically where the patient and the surgeon get on and like each other very much. So let's have a look. See, right, okay. Well, we're coming near to time, so I think we've probably exhausted the discussion here. So we're going to close a little bit early, let people stretch the legs, and then we'll be back in a couple of minutes for another session on VBT, this time Jason Bernard. So we'll close it there, please, Henry.
Thank you.